Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the EAS inaugural webinar. Thank you very much for taking your time out to develop and grow yet again an opportunity to learn, which is the key thing, which is why we all enter these courses, is why we all work in the industry, because we'll see a different type of player on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. So it's our pleasure as an association to deliver to you our inaugural webinar in the hope that many more will come across the season. But just some house rules before we continue. Please keep your mics and cameras off. The schedule for this afternoon will be an hour's interview with our expert guest, and then 30 minutes of Q&A at the end. If you want to put in a question, then put it into the chat, please. One of the board members will be monitoring the chat and selecting 5 or 6 questions so that we can have the opportunity to share with Les at the end of the webinar. That said, it's been a long process, and when we decided that we were going to have a webinar, between the board members, we had to decide on who would be our first guest, who would capture the imagination of our members, who would come to the table with knowledge, experience, expertise around the football industry, who has been involved in domestic and international football, who has worked their way up from grassroots to elite football. And it didn't take us long to deduce that that particular gentleman would be fitting and appropriate for this particular event. Is Mr. Les Reid, the ex-technical director of the FA, the CEO of Reid Consulting, amongst other organisations. A career that has spanned over a number of decades, which we won't elaborate on. A consultant, strategist in professional football, former UEFA Assistant Technical Committee member, director of the Professional Game Academy Audit Company, which, for those of you out there who are not aware, is part of the Premier League EPPP programme with the academies in the UK. Former technical director, as I alluded to previously, but on 2 occasions. So I don't mind repeating myself because it did actually happen on 2 occasions. A manager in his own right, a coach in his own right, having been to a number of World Cups and European Championships with England across the years. Been involved in Southampton in the Premier League, across the league programme, if you like, in a number of roles. Recently finishing his tenure there as vice chairman, and moving forward into the Hollywood glamour of Wrexham Football Club that I'm sure you're all familiar with by now. The extraordinary and romantic story of the rise of that particular club from non-league football to the present day into League One. So it's our pleasure as an association to welcome to you the football experts, the highly respected connoisseur of the game, and certainly full of knowledge and a fountain of knowledge and wealth of wisdom is Mr. Les Reid. Good afternoon, Les.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that very illustrious introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
No, it's our pleasure, and I think it's appropriate to share with the members that you are on holiday and that you've taken the time out simply because it's a mutual respect and appreciation of what each other do, and it was an opportunity for you to take time away from your holiday and share with us your knowledge. So we're ever grateful for that. Thank you very much Now, I think the most appropriate place to start is going back to your period when you fell in love with the game. And if you can take us from that period into the early years of your life, that would be great, Les.
Yeah, I mean, I think I watched my youngest grandchildren, one of my grandchildren is 5, and he just takes a football to bed. He just wears a football shirt every day, apart from today, first day back at school. And we got a photo of him in his school uniform, and he wasn't happy because he's had football shirts on all summer, and he just will not leave the ball alone. And that's reminded me of how I felt. My dad played football, so I had the opportunity to kind of follow him around, carry his boots, clean his boots, do all that. My dad was a professional back in the early 40s at West Ham and Arsenal and Millwall, London clubs. So I traipsed around a few of those. Then he went into sort of non-league football where it was easier to kind of go and kick a ball around and watch him. Yeah, I think I've just was born with a ball in the cot, I think. And like every kid, and like my grandson now, I wanted to be a footballer. I wanted to play for England. I wanted to win trophies and the World Cup and all those things that, a little bit taken for granted now because we didn't really have access to them. If you didn't go to games, when I was that age, it was very much match of the day highlights, and if you're allowed to stay up. So now it's easy to fall in love with the game because it's 24/7. It's there in front of you. There's all sorts of digital access stuff, and then there's collectible cards and everything like that. So yeah, I go back to those days where it just seemed to be part of my life, and I grew up and I have grown up with football. There's never been a break, and that journey, as you pointed out there, went from playing. I think what benefits me now is, and I say this a lot to people, is about growing is about failures as well as it is about successes that just come easily. And each time I got a knockback, it was okay. If I can't do it that way, I'll do it this way. So as a kid, back when I was a kid, a young teenager, there were no rules. There was no EPPP. There were no rules. You could train with West Ham on Monday, Arsenal on Tuesday, Aston Villa on Thursday, or whatever. You could travel anywhere. And that probably hindered the progress of a lot of youngsters. But it may also have given other youngsters an opportunity that they might not have had. And I was one of them. I played for my school team, which was where the clubs recruited back in those days. And I played for the district team when I was in the primary school, and that's where scouts used to turn up. They always had good contacts with the teachers, and we played in district games. I was lucky. I played for Islington, which meant our home ground was Arsenal, Highbury. We played district matches there. And I dreamed of playing for Arsenal. I didn't quite make it. I trained there, and was released at 14. What we would now call probably a development centre, rather than, because then you signed associate schoolboy at 14. Then I went to West Ham, my dad's old club as well, and trained with them. And I was doing really, really well at school. I played for England under-18 schools FA. When a lot of my mates who left school at 16 were playing for their professional clubs, and I kind of stayed on, got lots of schoolboy honours, and lots of people saying, "Oh, you should be a pro," but it didn't happen. I I had a very short period at Cambridge United,
Mhm.
and then went on a different journey altogether. But my start in football was playing, and lots of my mates ended up being professional players, and we stayed mates. And I had a very good non-league career, but never quite hit that one. So next thing is, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be the best coach, and then it went on, from there.
So extraordinary, really. You go from playing in Highbury, an iconic football ground in England, of course. You are at the home of academy football, the home of football with the Hammers.
Yeah.
And you progress through that football system, come away from playing and into coaching. So in terms of your coaching career, you initially start with Finchley and Wealdstone, and that proved to be a very successful introduction into the coaching world, Les. Can you elaborate on how that came about?
When it was clear that I wasn't going to go on this journey of being a full-time pro at the top level, I made a conscious decision to go to university. For me, I wanted to be involved in sport every day. So I went to university to study physical education, knowing that would, I'd be in sport. I'd have a career in sport. We had a very, very good team when I was there. We won the national championship a couple of times, and I got a kind of second bite of the cherry because we played Watford one Wednesday afternoon, and it was in winter, and Watford hadn't had a game for about a month, and Graham Taylor had just gone there as manager, and he decided to bring the entire first team squad. And we got trounced 5-1, but I scored the one, and I was told while I was in the shower by another student that Graham Taylor was waiting for me in the refectory because he wanted to have a chat with me about going on trial at Watford. I thought it was a joke, took no notice of it. By the time I got up there, he'd gone, but he'd left his assistant, who you'll know well, Gus, Tommy Wally, of ex-Welsh international fame. Tom Wally waited for me. They invited me in to play a few reserve games. And I had a conversation which basically went, I've gone down this route before, it didn't work out. I am going to finish this degree. Graham, being Graham, said, that's not a problem. You can play with us whenever you're free in the reserves. We'll support you through college, and then we'll see where we are when you've graduated. That was in the 4th division. My old club, Cambridge United, had got relegated. Watford had gone up to the 3rd, and by the time I finished college, they were a Premier League club or a 1st division club. And the guys that were in the first team, then playing in my position, had been doing so throughout their careers. Guys like Luther Blissett and John Barnes was coming through. I played in a team with Kenny Jackett, who's still a good friend. But that wasn't going to happen. So they recommended me to Wycombe Wanderers, and I went and played and signed for Wycombe Wanderers. Graham had good contacts with the chairman there, Brian Lee, who was the director of Bisham Abbey. First thing he said to me, first training session was, after the session, welcome to the club. This is how we do things here. You'll notice that most of our players are FA coaches, and our experienced ones are full badge FA coaches. You need to get on the first coaching course available to you. It happened to be at Bisham Abbey. We trained at Bisham Abbey, and I then got kind of inducted through that into the FA scheme, and I got my coaching, my full license, very, very young age, and made some very, very good contacts just through that bit of luck of the relationship between Brian Lee, who was the chairman of Wycombe Wanderers, formerly manager, and I just then my circle were all FA coaches. I went into teaching, and 4 years into teaching, was offered a new role at the FA, as the very first football development officer. And my region was the London and the southeast of England, and it was to develop coaching, to develop coaching centres for kids, and a whole load of other programs like the Soccer Star scheme and stuff like that, which basically meant me travelling around my region and visiting all of the clubs in my region every day. So all the London clubs, all the clubs down as far as Brighton, Portsmouth, were all in my region. So I just managed to build this incredible network of meeting up with the youth coaches and the community development officers at all of those clubs. And that kind of got me back into the system. And through that, I developed as a coach, and decided, okay, this is it, full-time coaching for me now. Not going to be a full-time player. Great experience, great mentors in guys like Graham Taylor, who stayed in touch with me beyond the Watford period. And then the FA had started the national school at Lilleshall. So I got the opportunity through my role at the FA to work with Dave Sexton, Mike Kelly, and Sir Bobby Robson, who used to coach at the school, even though he was the national coach at the time. And that's where I wanted to be. You know, I idolised Bobby Robson, and I remember saying to him one day, Bob, I'm going to work for you. And Italia 1990, I did. And that set me off on my kind of international career. So, I mean, at this point, you know, this chapter in the book, it's a little bit of luck. It's been meeting people who could help me, but who wanted to help me because I was so enthusiastic and ambitious and worked hard and gave up lots of time. I think they all recognise that, and you need those people on your journey. And I was very lucky to have them, which is why now I try and be that to other people if I can.
It's extraordinary, really, when you think of it. You know, there's a key message in there immediately in terms of the network. You know, so from the outset, as you're coming through the initial playing career, then into coaching, and the opportunities that presents itself with, and visiting those clubs, making contact with those coaches. In a way, you're observing players as they're playing for their schools, their districts around London, and generating names, generating a network of people. And there's an old adage, isn't there, that your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
And that, in many cases, can prove to be priceless. And having the opportunity, when the opportunity presents itself, when the door opens, you enter the coaching courses, you meet Sir Bobby, and connect and build a relationship, which in itself, as you alluded to, accelerated the journey that we're talking about here to the World Cup in 1990, where you found yourself working with Sir Bobby, and that leads us nicely on to really, Les, your observations of scouting, you know, at domestic level during that period leading up to the World Cup, from an international perspective as well. How was the scouting process within the FA at the time, and within domestic clubs that you were aware of? And how was it during the World Cup? Did you have a number of opposition scouts that would assist and support the whole team whilst you were at the World Cup, in generating reports? At the time in 1990, obviously, everybody on the call will be aware that the digitalization our era was far away. So it was the old paper and notebook and biro and pen and so forth. Can you elaborate a little and give us some insight into what the scouting looked like at that particular period?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I guess where I would start would be that when I took that first role on at the FA, it was a 3-year contract, and at the end of that 3-year contract, the FA took a step forward, because what part of my role was to in my region was to make sure every county and every local authority were persuaded to appoint their own local football development officers. And therefore, once that there was a 3-year plan, once that was over, that was all taken care of by them. And then what the FA did was they restructured into the program for excellence and the program for community development. And basically, we all were given the opportunity to apply for some of the jobs that were there. And you worked either on one program or the other. If you worked on the program for community development, your role within a region, so we were 5 regions, your role would be to liaise with the community programs of the clubs to enhance all of the grassroots and development and schemes. If you went for the elite program, you would become the regional director of coaching for your region, and your remit was purely with the professional clubs and the teams and the youth setups. So I applied for the Southeast and got it, and my role then was to do 2 things. One was to assist in the development of their coaches, but also to do it by coaching their players. So we had a long round of presentations to clubs, and the reason for that was we wanted to work closer with the potential England players. So it was part coach development by actually on grass presentations, on grass demonstrations with their own players. But that was, along with that, was that you needed to get to know those players. So I'd be visiting a centre of excellence at Millwall on a Thursday night, working with their under 12s, with their coaches, giving some hints and tips and developing the coaches using the under 12s, but making sure I knew who all their best players were, because we were doing talent ID for the Lilleshall National School. So I would do that, and I would also run an FA regional development squad in the under 13 and under 14 age groups. And so the best players that I'd worked with in the clubs, we would invite to Bisham Abbey for a long weekend once a month. And then from those players, we would recommend which players should go to the Lilleshall national trials. So players from my region, like Jermaine Defoe, like Scott Parker, like Frank Lampard, like John Terry, all came through that process. But it also gave me, great opportunity to work with Jermaine Defoe when he was 10 years of age, and all the way through, mainly because I'd moved. My job led me to Charlton Athletic, where he was a young player. He went to Lilleshall, from Lilleshall went to West Ham. So I worked with Jermaine virtually all of his career, because I picked him up again playing for England at youth and senior level. So that was an unbelievably good job, but it got you to know the industry as well. So we were not trained, we were coaches looking to identify talent. Charles Hughes, who was our ultimate boss at the time, wasn't happy with that. So he gave each of us a number of different projects around talent identification. I had a fantastic project where I could interview highly educated academics around the world on talent identification in sport in their countries. And I went as far as South Africa, I went to New Zealand, Australia, and I spent a lot of time in Africa on various projects. But it really gave me a great foundation for what to look for and so on. I had the privilege of being the first ever FA coach to be issued with a laptop, and almost needed a crane to lift it. It was about 3 inches thick, covered in armor plating, and it ran on the old Unix system, which basically meant letters and numbers. That you couldn't do graphics, you couldn't do anything else. But what it meant was I had the name of every registered player in the program for excellence from the age of 9 to 16. And it was the first time any attempt was made to create a database that also contained scouting information plus data, plus numbers. But it was all letters and numbers. There were no pictures, there wasn't any graphics. It was the old Unix system. But essentially, when I went to a centre of excellence, I would know in advance who would be there that night, who would be taking part, and what kind of grades had their coaches given them. Because we issued every coach with, which was basically a card with a lot of boxes on it, and some people might remember them. And you put an X in a box next to a number. That was fed into what was called an electrical photoelectric card reader, and it printed out a report. Now that had to be sent to Lillishall to do it, and then the report come back. But it meant that over the course of a season, we could collect a significant amount of data about the players registered in the system. That gave us something to work on, not just for talent ID, but also about what methods were being used, were most successful, and so on. Clubs weren't too happy with it at the beginning. And all those same clubs now have invested lots of money into huge databases. But that was the first attempt, because what we wanted to do is, if we had a player like a Defoe who came through that system and went all the way through to play for England and Spurs and successful, we wanted to know why. What had he done on that pathway? What did he look like at 10? What did he look like at 15, and so on? And I think in the fullness of time, all of that early kind of research and pioneering work has been forgotten. It's like nothing happened until Sports Code came on the scene or Prozone came on the scene. But that was really important for the way the centres of excellence developed into the EPPP, and then the academy program as we know it now. And obviously a lot of different people have added bits to it as it's gone along, but that's where it started.
Which is fascinating, and I think that would resonate with a lot of people on the call, with all the members and the board in many aspects, the ones who have been involved certainly for many years. Some haven't seen that evolution across time because they've just come into the game, they're new into the game, might not be aware of many elements that you discussed there, which have been a firm foundation really for where we're at now. So on your journey, as you elaborated on there, and there was a global one, of course, having the opportunity to go to other continents and so forth. You're back in the UK. You're now entering a period where you're going to work at Charlton as the manager. What was your experience of the recruitment department at Charlton like at that particular time before you then moved on into Southampton? Which
yeah. I mean, I feel a few gaps in there, because my first time at Charlton, again, goes back to where we started this talk, was I conducted the FA full licenses, as they were called, before they became UEFA A, at Lillishall. There were only 2 a year. One was for existing professional coaches or players, and the other one was held at a different time of the year, basically for anybody else. But it was called the school teachers one because it happened during the school holidays, and that's when all the pros were in pre-season. But on one of those courses, I had a student called Alan Kirbishley, who came up, was a bit sceptical, and I had already taken him in on his preliminary award and recommended that he take his A license. So he came up a bit skeptical. At one point we had words about his input, and he was very good. He kicked on. He got his badge, and I'm talking about a course that probably had Peter Reid on it, may have had Sam Allardyce, may have had a lot of top coaches, and he went back to his job as a reserve team coach at Charlton Athletic that year, only to find that the manager was Lenny Lawrence and was leaving to go to Middlesbrough, and they had to replace the manager, and the chairman put him and Steve Gritt in charge, both of whom had taken on their coaching courses. When Steve Gritt stepped down, Alan needed a coach. I happened to be working with the Charlton youth team, and Neil Bamfield, who's had an excellent career as well, was the youth coach there. And he said to me, before you go, Curbs wants to meet you in the office. So I thought, okay, go up, see Curbs. Thought we were just going to have a cup of tea and reminisce. He said, I need a new coach. I think you're the man. I think I need you to help me get through this. My first management job. I stayed there for 3 years and we got promoted to the Premier League. And then the reverse happened. Howard Wilkinson got the job at the FA as the first technical director, needed an assistant. And the year we got promoted to the Premier League, I at the end of that season, I moved back to the FA to become the director of technical development, which was basically number 2 to Howard. And then we put in a number of programs again, but by which time we were starting to implement scouting into the FA network. We converted one of the regional coaches, very experienced, Colin Murphy, into head of scouting and recruitment for the FA. His job was to hire a team of scouts that would work from youth all the way through to the first team. We would also have, we brought in 6 analysts on internships to work both on opposition and our own performance analysis. We'd done a deal with Liverpool John Moores University, and we started now to get a bit more professional in the way we created our database, how we did our scouting. And we were fortunate being the FA. A company called Sports Code came along from Australia originally and said, we'd like you to trial this bit of kit we've got. We use it for cricket and rugby, but we've not used it in soccer. So we trialed it, we did a deal with them, and then all of our teams then used Sports Code, and we were able to use Sports Code to input our own talent ID and scouting data. We had 45 scouts at that time, length and breadth of the country. Probably the first group of scouts who'd all been told that you need to work to a template, you need to provide this information that we can turn into data, and carry forward what we'd learned several years before. At that time, probably more intuitive scouting than data analysis, but gradually we shifted the balance to get the balance in the middle, which is what I've talked about on these elite scouting courses. But being the FA, we got a responsibility to the game. So then our job was to get our regional coaches out and our national coaches out there, working with the clubs to kind of take on board this methodology. And therefore, Colin was the first person to start running scouting courses for the FA, which was before the level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the idea was scouts to operate in this manner needed training. I think that was the start of an evolution when I think I went with the team to Euro 2000. So I was assistant coach to Kevin Keegan in Euro 2000. But one of the things I said to him that I wanted to set up was a proper opposition analysis and scouting, not just for the tournament, but so we would come back with every feasible bit of information we could gather from that tournament on every other team in the tournament, around style of play, top players, what was the history of those players, you know, how did Zidane get to where he got to, what was Figo's pathway. So we did a deal with Octagon CSI, who've grown a little bit since then. They were providing stuff for Sky. Went down to Teddington, met their guys. They sent out a studio deck linked to Sports Code and 2 analysts, or what they call taggers. And basically, we analysed every minute of every game and every player in that tournament. And Roy Hodgson and Gerard Houllier, Arsene Wenger, Amy Jacquet at that time, were all part of the technical observer group, and they used to come around and watch you train. I think that Gareth Southgate's new job apparently, but they would come round and they were astonished. They'd never seen anything like it. The technical director of Belgium, Michel Sablon, who ended up a good friend of mine, invited me out to Belgium to go through this. And UEFA gave it significant profile in their technical Euro 2000 technical report. And then I think that got UEFA on it. So UEFA then started to look into this, took it seriously, and then so did some of the clubs who around Europe and that's when you started seeing other companies springing up beyond. So the Prozone was one of the first, and the groups that have ended up being Huddle were all small groups, startups at the time. You know, it's all evolved now. I was asked to do a presentation on a UEFA technical conference around it, and there was an interesting piece of kit. I'm trying to think of the name of it now. It's gone out of existence. It'll come to me, but it was a do-it-yourself digital blackboard, really. So the kind of thing you see done easily on Sky now, but it took hours and hours to program it. But we did all our set plays and all of our tactical stuff on this thing that was basically a moving tactics board. And obviously that now is that software has been merged into analysis software. And so again, you know, kind of I wouldn't say led the way, but we took advantage of the opportunities that came our way. And then because we were a federation, we then you know, demonstrated those to others and tried to build stuff around that for the benefit of the game, and particularly the English game. The interesting thing was the Evening Standard did a double-page pullout on me just before the tournament, before we left for the tournament, and I'm sat there. The picture, I've still got it, is me and the original Apple computer, the one that looked like an egg. And yet at the end of that tournament, some people may remember that we lost 3-2 to Portugal, having been 2-0 up at half time. And Kevin didn't go to the press conference. He sent me, which was really kind of him, with sort of, you know, 300 journalists, 60 TV cameras, blah, 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 to explain what went wrong at half time. None of them mentioned data or analysis or any of the stuff that we'd been doing, even though it was publicly made aware. And when I look back on it, I think that was a sign of the times. They could have thrown that at me, They could have said, you know, it proves the data stuff doesn't work. But actually, they hadn't taken it seriously enough to even bother. They wanted to know, you know, was it something we did in training? Did we play someone in the wrong position? Nobody referred to the fact that before we went to that tournament, there was a lot of publicity about the way we use data. Excuse me.
Okay.
So then went back to Charlton, and when I went to Charlton with Alan Kirbishley, we we had myself, who was really assistant coach, first team, but oversaw the academy. There was a reserve team coach, Keith Peacock, another famous player, Keith and manager. Keith was reserve team coach and head of scouting. And we had Jimmy Hendry, who was physio, kit man, odd job, everything. And Alan Kirbishley. There were 4 of us. That was it. There were no other technical staff. We had part-time scouts who used to send reports, handwritten reports in to Keith. And then basically what we did in that time was try to organise it. So, but it was metal filing cabinet, proper templates on the reports, all handwritten, but if it had been on a computer, it would have been a database, and that we used that both for scouting opposition and for through scouting opposition, identifying quality players at our level, but also our other scouts scouring the country. And we had, when we got promoted at Wembley in one of the best ever playoff finals against Sunderland, we had 9 academy produced players in that squad, but the players, so that would have been Richard Rufus, who scored, Sean Newton, who scored a penalty, but the players we'd brought in, like Clive Mendonca from Hartlepool, who ended up a legend, scored a hat-trick in that final, not been done since. People couldn't understand where we got him from. He was a northeasterner, and he'd scored a few goals for Grimsby, but was continuously brought up in reports, got to keep looking at this one, blah, 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 blah. And we pulled him really from Grimsby, from nowhere. And had he not had such a serious back operation, I think he would have gone on to be a good Premier League player and probably play for England. But that was as a result of very detailed scouting and monitoring the scouting without the computer-aided software that we've got now. So the principles, I don't think, have changed a lot. It's the ability to do it quicker and more thoroughly.
Yeah, I guess when you look at anything in most aspects, principles remain the same. It's just the evolution of how you implement a program or a system or a process, but it's underpinned by the same principles. Yeah. So that in itself would have taken a lot of time. It would have been people reading those reports, cross-referencing, and for the same name to be appearing on a regular basis, it'd be your guys identifying, this is the name again, this is Mendonca again, and great goal scorer, by the way. He could score goals.
Yeah.
Could go score goals, but you've had all that now in the background. You move forward now into Southampton and the black box model. Can you provide our members with an insight that there are people on this call who've heard about the black box, they've read about it, most probably haven't spoken to anybody that was directly involved with the concept at the club, which is why they've got the opportunity here to listen to directly to yourself about how that was implemented, what the benefits were from the black box, and where would that be today how would that appear like today if that would have been developed further? You know, yes, it was pretty recent, but technology changes over time. Where do you think that would be today if it was to evolve itself in line with technology development?
Yeah. Okay. So again, coming into it, I'll drop back to my time at Charlton when I became the manager, because that was a separate period. And I didn't go there to coach. I went there as a consultant to work on Charlton Athletic overseas coaching centres. So the idea was to build a global network of Charlton associated coaching centres, and develop a relationship with them and with our academy, to do exchange visits, but ultimately to identify talent in places where people weren't looking. But we started with the ones that were recognisable to us. So we went to New Zealand and formed a partnership with a club called New Zealand Knights, which is I think just left the A League, but they they were the strongest team in New Zealand. Played in North Harbour Stadium, and we started an academy there called the Charlton Knights Academy, and we did that in 5 or 6 different places in America, different states of America. We went into Australia. Then we went into, when we got the hang of it, we then got braver and we went into Spain. And those centres still exist under a different name. But it was during that period of setting these up and staffing them and putting together the kind of the way it would work, both in player development but also in talent identification, that Alan Kirbishley left the club, and I was asked to help them with the process of recruiting the next manager, which I did. But during the process, Ian Dowie, if you remember, was leaving Mr. Jordan at Crystal Palace, and a couple of the directors thought it was too good an opportunity not to try and get Ian Dowie, even though the reason he was leaving was to move back up north, which was going to upset Simon Jordan, and it did cause a massive row between the two clubs. But they gave the job to Ian. It never really settled, and they wanted me to be a sporting director. Ian asked if I would be. I took Ian on his full badge. He asked me if I'd be his assistant coach, which is what I was, and it was probably a mistake. There was a very kind of a squad that hadn't been assembled on in the right way. It was players just being added, and if I were to reel off some of the names now, hardly anyone here would remember any of them. And subsequently, it didn't work. The results didn't go well, and Ian moved on, and they asked me to take over in the interim. I actually had 7 matches, and it's recorded as 6 because the week before I took over, Ian was off ill, and I took the Manchester City game, which we won, which will never go down on my record, but there you go. However, what that experience of working with that squad as the manager and then dealing with them and their agents was how badly that recruitment had been done, and therefore, that was an incredible learning curve for me. So when I then moved to Fulham as director of football, assistant manager with Laurie Sanchez, I moved from Charlton to the Northern Ireland national team. We did beat England, but that got us the role at Fulham. Laurie took over as manager, wanted me to go as assistant, but by the end of that season, I was asked if I would become, actually it was before the end of that season, I become director of football. And so part of my role in the end there was the appointment of Roy Hodgson, and the club got to the final of the old UEFA Cup. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because there was no real scouting system at Fulham at the time, and that gave me an opportunity at last with real authority to build one, and that became almost the template later for Southampton. So that's why it's taken me on that journey. But I went into Southampton as a consultant when they were in administration. So there was an incredible amount of work to do, and the ambitions of the owners were to get in the Premier League within 5 years. We didn't have the players that could achieve that, and we didn't have the players between the sort of 16 to 18 age group that were going to be Premier League players, because all the best players had gone during administration. We did have a really good crop of under 15s who weren't able to leave up until that point. And I think if our owner hadn't taken over and we hadn't changed the system, they might have done. But that included James Ward-Prowse, it included Harrison Reed, we had a group there that we felt were good enough. If by the time we're in the Premier League, they'll be in their 20s and they'll be Premier League players. So we've got to add to them. So how do we do that? We had to make sure our academy recruitment was absolutely spot on, modern. We had the advantage of the centre at Bath University, which meant we could get into Cardiff, where the Gareth Bales, the Lloyd Isgroves, and players like that had come from. It would meant we could get down into the southwest, where the current captain Jack Stevens came from. So we would be able to build our academy, but we knew we couldn't do that. Southampton's got 50% of his catchment area is water. 20% of it is New Forest, and 25% of it is covered in blue in Portsmouth. So the catchment area was very small. We had to go further, which meant we had to have far better information about players from abroad, players from around the rest of the country. So basically, it would start the structure. So get a structure together, which meant we could scout domestically with experts in the domestic area, scout the rest of the country with people who were based elsewhere, who knew those areas very well, northeast, northwest, etc. And then Europe. So we decided to focus the initial European scouting on the first team, because we weren't geared up to bring in young foreign players. When I say first team, I mean under 18s, under 17s, and not much younger. Morgan Schneiderlin we got from Strasbourg, and he went through our academy from 17 upwards. And having got the structure in place, decided we knew where to look, and decided we had the experts, we then had to say, right, how are we going to do it? So then it's a matter of player profiling. What do we know about our players? What's our future Premier League player going to look like in each position? So get all the heads around a table and work on these individual player profiles based on age groups. What do they look like at 20? What do they look like at 16, 18, 14, and so on? What was Luke Shaw like as an under 8? What did we have? Fortunately, a legend, a great legend, passed away now, Rod Ruddock, who you'll know well, Gus, had been the kind of old school scout that kept unbelievably immaculate records, and he had everything on the laptop. And when he found those players like Luke Shaw, Ward-Prowse, he'd logged the detail. So that helped us with our player profiling. So we had the brains now. We had we knew what we were looking for at every age group in each area. We had to now work out how we're going to put all this together. So we started with sports code, like I had done before with England. We had Bath University. We had great links with Loughborough, where we were scouting the up and coming analysts. So we said to the big universities in sport, when you need a year's work experience, or a year's, send us your best graduates, people doing their masters, send us your best ones. We'll pay for it all. We'll do it for their year, but we want you to continue to do that. So we started that off. we had 8 analysts, 4 on performance, one of whom was academy performance, and then 4 on recruitment, and basically said, right, you've got the brains. What's on the market that we can use? How are we going to create a database which lets me as a sporting director very quickly go, I need to see all the centre forwards in this age group with this profile, and I need to be able to put a report together that will last no more than 20 minutes, nearer to 10, that I can show to the coaching staff. Give them the tasks, let the brains get to work on it, and essentially they used and re-engineered sports code to work for us, but we wanted our own server. The other thing was we worked out was if we want to look in, let's say, Austria for players, how we found Sadio Mane, we need to know how this all works in Austria. What's the standards? Who are the best? Who can we compare with? What are the parameters we need? So we worked all that out, and we then basically paid for Opta stats. But what we couldn't do is just feed Opta. Opta can feed into all the stuff you get now, but then we couldn't. So essentially, we decided we'd have to build our own. So we got a software company, nothing to do with sport. It was all data analytics for business, etc. We got a software company to come in and build one for us, which was bespoke, which met our needs, but it could pull in the Opta stats. It could pull in the homegrown stats that our own guys were producing on sports code. But also at that time we had a whole system of Prozone in the stadium that during administration had been turned off. We asked Prozone to turn it back on again and we would pay the current rate. They said, no, don't do that. We've got new software, new stuff. Let's work with you and we'll put it in. So we then had tracking programs as well that we could add. So every game that we had at the stadium, we not only tracked our own players for performance analysis, but we tracked all the other players from the other teams to feed more information into our database. So it was all a bit chaotic, and then we pulled it all together. And I went to a lecture or a conference, and one of the speakers was Matthew Syed, who'd written a book called Bounce, which is all about training and practice. And I read that book 5 times and was a real advocate. And he used that speech to talk about what he called black box thinking. Mm-hmm. And essentially it was based on what does the black box in an aeroplane do. And I use this, as you know, Gus, on the course, is it doesn't just record data in case there's a crash. It records data so that pilots can be trained better, so there's better information, so cabin crew can be trained in all sorts of procedures. And every time there's a flight, they upgrade and update the data. And he used it as an example of black box thinking. So my eureka moment was, that's what we'll do. So we had a room at the training ground built that was a bit like the Starship Enterprise console, with laptops that came out of the desk and stuff, but with a huge screen and several other screens, which was the place where you interrogated the black box. So we called it the black box, and we put a label on it, the black box. It was a projection room. It was the work was all done in the analytics department by the guys, but it all fed into there. So take a transfer window when I've got Nigel Adkins sat there and he wants to know about this foreign player that he's never heard of, and we need to say, we want to say this is the player we're looking for, is to be able to get him in there and within 10 to 20 minutes have produced all the necessary data that he'll understand, that he gets. So he doesn't ask those questions like, yeah, but is he quick? He's clearly quick. Yeah, but is he good in the air? He's clearly good in the air. It's telling you that. Boom, 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 boom. But then a video replay of examples of all of that stuff that I know the coach is going to ask.
Yeah.
We eliminated this. Yeah, but that's just the good bits. They weren't the good bits. They were the right bits. So they were backed up by data to say, if we bring this player, this is what he will do for us. Not this is what he did for his other club 4 or 5 times a season. This is what he will do. Because the data's telling us he does that regularly. He does it like that. But as you know, coaches like to see it. So if you say, is he quick? Yes, he's quick. Watch this. 3 clips. Wow, he's quick. Cedric, we got from Cedric Suarez, we got from Portugal. Sold in a 10-minute presentation. Crosses, if you're Nigel, you're imagining Ricky Lambert on the end of those crosses.
Yeah.
Graziano Pella is your new Ricky Lambert. So he's going to score same amount of goals. In fact, he scored more in his first season, 28 goals. Most of the assists from Cedric or Dusan Tadic. So basically, this was, yes, we've seen them. Yes, we've got loads of reports. We've collated those reports, put them in the system alongside the data, and the black box is now going to churn out our target list with the best ones at the top. But because we do it every week, he might not next week. That performance might have changed things, and he's now dropped it. But it's when you get to the moment of truth where you're going to actually decide, right, these are the targets we're going after. You need to be sure they're in the right position in that league table, and have frequently been there throughout the season, because they're going to give you what you want. So we called it the black box. Nowadays, the big firms, the Huddles, the Stats Bombs, and all that, they've got the clever software, the technology, and they do it. And if Arsenal is an example of one that they developed their own on the basis of buying out a company that did it, and then they've got their secrets now that we had at Southampton, which is about, well, we've got our own system. We're not going to tell you how it works.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, one of the other things that was really good about that was I could talk to the agent, talk to the player, and say, this is why we want to buy you. This is why this is what our coach saw in you. This is what you're going to do for us. And it's amazing how embarrassed and absolutely shy they are when they're watching themselves in the video that showed them how good they are. And that was a selling point as well. We actually, in latter years, had players saying, I've heard about this black box, probably because the agent had told them. And I remember Yannick Vestergaard wanting to have a look at his the piece that we'd put together on him. The technology's there now that's improved without a doubt. Again, Gus, I'm going to say it's the principle. Yeah. It's that combination of intuitive scouting from experienced, trained scouts working to a profile and a date and a template, with the ability to throw their own 2 penneth in, regular meetings where they can discuss that.
Yeah.
Sharing that information amongst the scouting fraternity and the coaching fraternity. But it's still the principle of data-backed, intuitive decision making, with the best technology that can supply it for you. And anyone who doesn't do that now, when the technology is out there on the market, is missing a trick. The only thing I will say is do your homework on what you invest in, especially on where does the data come from. So who is inputting that data at ground level? Because for some, it will be a sophisticated Optastats kind of transition. Yep. For others, it'll be a young person, you know, in a lab somewhere, or you know, in the Philippines or somewhere, inputting data on his day off. You know, you've got to be able to trust the data. For me, the biggest question is not how clever the technology is and how good it looks on the screen digitally. It's where did the data come from? How accurate is the data?
Now that's fascinating, Les, and we've had a few comments in the chat in relation to it. One in particular from an aviation engineer. So accelerating forward from Premier League into non-league. Wrexham, the story that everybody's heard about on a global scale. 2 Hollywood actors coming into British football for the first time, identified a club based on the due diligence that they'd done around a number of clubs, of course, and identified that Wrexham was the best fit for them and the project that they had in mind. You become involved as a board advisor. They're in non-league. There's, you'd suspect, a plan, a strategy in place. How have you seen the difference in recruitment in the non-league, where you started off with Wrexham, moving into League One this season? What are the instrumental changes and developments that you've come across in those 3 or 4 seasons, from a recruitment perspective, from an expectations perspective, and also how can you see that evolving? You know, if the future is bright for Wrexham as they've had that trajectory of success, are they going to continue on that trajectory? And how are they going to have to evolve to make sure that they fall in line with modern methods, modern approaches, modern departments? So we've got a couple of questions coming in, Les, for as you finish this question, so that we can engage with the members. But yeah, please provide us with an insight to Wrexham.
Yeah, I mean, very, very quickly. So, you know, we've gone through my background and all of that, high tech, you know, that we talked about at the end. So they buy Wrexham in COVID, so they've never been there. They've basically just taken advice from 1 or 2 people. They're looking for a story, because they're Hollywood, so they're looking for a story, and they discover this club in North Wales that apparently was once a big club and is well supported and is now in the doldrums, but has the capacity to go back and maybe even beyond where it was before. Fanatical fans supported the club through its bad days, so you can see the story unraveling. But they're listening to all this from America, yep, and don't get a chance to come and see it for themselves, but do a lot of online stuff with the fans, and then eventually go ahead with it. The plan, if there was one, was we need help. That was the plan. So I get a call the last week of the season. So there's one more game to go, and all the kickoffs are on Sunday at 3 o'clock. There's one more game to go. If Wrexham win, they have a chance of the playoffs, but they have to win, and somebody else has to draw. So I think I'm going to see a team that throws everything, including the kitchen sink, at Dagenham Football Club, who've got nothing to play for, and try and get into the playoffs. It was like a pre-season friendly, and in the end, they were fortunate to get a draw, but it wasn't enough. I noticed two things from that game, never having seen Wrexham before. The age of the squad, well, half the squad would have been in their early 30s, mid 30s, but the bench were all under 21, apart from one who was 35. Half time, I think he's going to make some changes. He brings on the 35-year-old. 15 minutes to go, he brings on a young player called Jordan Davis and another player called Ponticelli, who'd come through the youth system there. Ponticelli could run. Davis was a clever player and had been previously at Brighton. They changed the game, but they didn't have enough time to change the result, and they got the equaliser in that period. But I couldn't work out why these boys had just been left on the bench till now. So anyway, Sunday morning, I get a call to say that the manager's been sacked. His assistants, of which there were two, have gone with him. We need you to start the process of recruiting a new coach and coaching team. Oh, and by the way, we've got 10 days to get our retained list to the league. So we need to know who we're going to keep and who we're going to release. So I said, well, what about the scouting staff or the head of recruitment? We don't have them. In fact, there was nobody else. So there was me. So I spent a week on Y-Scout looking at Wrexham's team, Wrexham's performances, but also trying to compare it with other teams in the National League, particularly the successful ones. So without any data, without any information other than me going on Y-Scout, frantically going through each member of the squad, I released 18 players and recommended that we recruit 10 more and have a look at what was in the youth team, which turned out to be Max Cleworth, who's now in the squad, just got a new contract. But based on very little evidence, not the way I'd usually do it, not the way I'd been doing it. So, but I had to switch very quickly then to find a manager, because I had to get a coach in place who was going to work with me on the recruitment of the 10 that I thought need to come in. So that manager appointment process took place first. And I did it in the way I would have done it at Southampton, very, very stringently. The only problem was Phil Parkinson turned us down first time. But that's when the Hollywood magic helps, because Rob McElhenney decided that he would phone him up and persuade him. And I said, just don't throw the kitchen sink at him. No, I won't do that. And then his agent phoned me the next day and said, he's thrown the kitchen sink at him. So, but what he promised Phil was all the stuff that I'd promised Phil, but not immediately, i.e. we need to build a recruitment department, we need to do this, we need to do that. If you take the job, Phil, you're coming into a club that is in the doldrums. It's the stadium's half falling down. There's no training ground. There are no staff. So it's going to be you, and you're going to have to bring in your assistant goalkeeping coach. We've retained the fitness coach. That's it. Oh, and the analyst, who were both just left college in their 20s, early 20s. Not experienced enough, but I think we can train them. And that's what Phil came into. So immediately the next phone call is, right, we need to get some players. We've got no reports, no database, no scouts, nothing. So that would be me, Phil, Steve Parkin, and a scout that Phil's had on a number of occasions before, Chris Johnson, who's very experienced, but not used to working with data and stuff like that. His eyes on, but he has got an incredible network and knowledge of young players around. So the end of the day, Chris, myself, and Phil sat down and wrote out long lists of players at the level, players who had been performing higher. I did know one of them because I live not more than 30 minutes away from Cambridge, and a fella called Paul Mullin had scored 34 goals that year for Cambridge. And I thought he might be all right, but turned out that he was more than all right. So we used Paul as a benchmark then to say, well, that's what we've got to be looking for. Let's not look for National League players. Let's look for players higher than that. And that's when Record Transfer and Ollie Palmer, who's still with us, and so on. So, but it was a real rush job.
and that has been no doubt similar, because the program has been accelerated. You've gone from 1 to League 2, and you're signing players on 2-3-year contracts, and that means that if the program continues to accelerate, they're going to end up in League 1 with a club and so forth, and maybe they're not ready for League 1, then they're going to have to go out on loan because they're still in the contract. So it's a fascinating journey that they've been on, and I think it will continue. You know, the interest, the hype is there, without a shadow of a doubt. But just as we're closing on the time wise, Les, can you respond to a couple of the questions that we have?
Yeah.
One being from Jordan, who's an English scout. He's based in Venezuela, and his question is: with an undervalued and understood market like Venezuela, how do you advise getting buy-in from more established markets? It's often I hear from clubs, we don't know the standard level of football. These barriers to entry were somewhat eased post-Brexit when it came to visas. Now it's a case of visibility and understanding. We've got a couple more questions after that to keep on time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer it pretty quickly. The answer is in the question. So the reasons clubs are giving are the very things that clubs need to do. So to expand the market and exploit opportunities in places like Venezuela, then the clubs need to go and research that market. They need on the ground advice. They need people who know the market and know the talent. But essentially, they have to make a positive effort to go and understand these talent pools. It's not difficult to find talent pools. You can do that as a desktop exercise. You can just look at where players' pathways have gone from what country to which country next, particularly South America, where players move around in South America into Brazil or Argentina, but then move on into Portugal or Spain. You can track that, and then you can measure the efficacy of those talent pools. The other thing you can do is look at potential. So if there's talent coming out of Venezuela or Ecuador, like Brighton have been doing, is there more talent there, but the methodology doesn't exist to discover it yet, or is there potential there that only needs some developmental work in order to be at the level required to play in maybe bigger clubs in the world or Europe. And that's where I think the multi-club organisations are going to go, because they have the ability to go and do that.
Excellent.
Not just look at the players, but develop them.
I hope that makes sense for you, Jordan, because that seems to be the ecosystem at the moment. The other question, briefly, is sporting directors of footballs, who are actually running the clubs now, based on the changes of managers. Chelsea being an example, they've changed 20 coaches since Jose left in 2007. I think you're aware, but in one word, who's actually running the philosophy of the clubs now, Les?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot on my sporting director courses, and essentially, it's the number one thing when a new owner comes into a club, or if a sporting director is new to a club with an existing owner, is having clarity over why has the owner bought the club? So what are the owner's needs and wants? And sometimes we get that wrong. We assume all owners want the same. You know, they want to win matches and they don't want to lose money. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes there's a bigger picture in their head. So it's really important to have that clarity before you can put something together that's going to achieve it. One of the things I think that needs to be approached either way is always the role of the coach. So if the owner thinks the coach is there just to coach the team, and that's what he's employing him for, you have to know that, and you have to choose a coach that is 100% buying into that, and he doesn't want to get involved in anything else. If you're an owner who thinks the coach should be running everything, then you have to accept that if and when he goes for whatever reason, that all goes out with him, and you're going to get someone else who's going to come in and want to do it their way. And I think this is a mistake that owners often make, which is partly what my consultancy is all about, is to helping them not make those mistakes. So for me, from a sporting director's point of view, there are points of clarification you need. What does the owner want? You know, so at Southampton, my owner said, I want to be in the Premier League in 5 years' time. I want to target 50% of our squad at that time to be home developed through the academy. I want to play football that the fans love to watch, and I want to be sustainable as a Premier League club without having to keep putting my own hand in my pocket. We achieved all four of those things, and we achieved it within 3 years, simply because we had absolute clarity, and the owner was not going to change his mind. In fact, he died and his daughter took over, and she said, do what my dad wanted. So that gave me absolute clarity on what we had to do, and that the rest is history in terms of how we did it. But sometimes you don't get jobs where you can work in that environment. Sometimes the owners will change their mind from week to week. You know, I've had an owner who changed his mind from the beginning to the end of a sentence. But so it's hard, because I say to the sporting directors, if you can't get that, you really have to think about whether you should be taking that job. If you can't get that clarity.
Yeah. Perfect sense. Perfect sense. Last one, Les, and it's from Harrison. Hi, Les. I've recently completed a project on organisational philosophies in elite football. How would you best utilise these findings in order to initially approach and work with clubs and organisations to improve their operations across the club in a modern day game?
Oh, wow, what a question to finish with. I get asked this question a lot. You know, I get posts on LinkedIn from people who are saying, you know, like, I've done all this, I can do this, but I can't get, the clubs don't listen. It's the industry is an incredible industry for being talking a good game, but being pretty introspective. So at the end of the day, whether you want to be a scout, whether you want to be an analyst, whether you want to be a coach, a manager, sporting director, head of recruitment, whatever it is you want to be or achieve in this industry, it is really about your network. It is really about getting the inside information, and being able to converse with the right people. If it's selling services, there are a million people doing it, trying to do it all the time. I get them all along. Website designers, from young guys who've got another tech bit that tracks this or that. There are hundreds and hundreds of them. Chief executives, chairman, owners of clubs get these by the thousand, and they don't sift through them. What they do is listen to what their kind of trusted advisors say to them or propose to them. So it is very much about your profile, your presence, particularly online, and your ability to network with the right people to be able to converse them with the people who are actually looking for what you offer. It is very frustrating. It really is. And I find it hard just responding to the number of emails, and I try to respond because I don't like just blanking people, but I do get the same thing again and again and again, and everyone can do it better than somebody else. What I have found is the European Association of Scouts, the PFA, who I've worked with, the UEFA Elite Scouts program, courses or seminars and things like that, where you get to become part of a network, a greater network of people, means you can pose that question to the right people. But don't give up, don't get frustrated, and you've got to keep plugging away until you prove what you do makes a difference.
Les, I think we'll close there, and you've closed it appropriately on the right people. We've got the right people today in the room.
Yeah.
Yourself as our expert guest, our members, our European Association Scouting family. I hope that they've enjoyed the last 90 minutes. It's been insightful. There's been some good comments in the chat coming through, thanking you for the session. And certainly as the inaugural webinar that the EAS have put on, moving forward, we will have more webinars with industry platform product suppliers. But in the meantime, we sincerely thank you for your generosity in giving up your time, the expert knowledge and wealth of wisdom that you've shared with us this afternoon, and certainly from your period on the course, the UEFA Elite Scout Programme, which the UEFA Academy run, which is where we all made the connection. And it goes back to the initial point you made, which has ran all the way through. It's been the same theme: network. Your network is your net worth. And ultimately, that's what we've heard throughout the whole webinar. And that's what scouting the industry is about. That's what makes us all survive. That's what makes us all industrious in our work, is connecting with people. And we've certainly done that today. So thank you very much, Mr. Reid, for your time. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. You won't hear from me again. And hopefully have a safe journey home, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.